Hello, fellow intelligent investors. My name is René Zellman, and the goal of this video is that you truly understand the concept of opportunity cost, and the opportunity cost of owning a car in particular, and what it means for you and your wealth building process. Generally, on this channel I provide tips and tricks that should help investors find superior businesses that are available at a fair price. But of course, this channel is not only about looking at the fundamentals of individual businesses, about valuation, about management incentive structures, and about key investing metrics. No, I would say more generally, I also want to provide tips that should help you build wealth. And clearly, building wealth does not only require a sound investment framework, a sound investment approach, but more generally, you need to stick to fundamental wealth building principles. And one core principle that you need to internalize if you want to get rich is that you need to spend less than you make. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's the truth. If you can't do that, you will never build wealth. It's that simple. And quite frankly, it can certainly be argued that the amount of money that you are able to invest regularly, so that's basically your savings ratio, that this ratio is more important than your investment returns. And that's why I want to address the topic of opportunity cost in this video, and more specifically the opportunity cost of purchasing and owning a car. I will outline why your car might be much more expensive than the price tag you see at the car dealership. And the numbers can be quite shocking. And I will show you how much money you can destroy with one single purchase decision. So without further ado, let's get started.
Have you ever wondered how you can make your hard-earned money work for you? Have you ever dreamed of building generational wealth and leaving a legacy? My name is René Zellman, and I'll teach you how you can manage and invest your money with confidence, a long-term vision, and without losing your mind. Join me on my journey of intelligent investing and learn how smart people can compound their money effectively and accumulate wealth.
Alright, the true cost of a bad decision is often much higher than one might think at first. I would like to briefly describe this idea by using the example of a car purchase. Let's consider George. In 2009, George got his first job and decided to reward himself with a car. In fact, the year 2009 was probably the best year to buy a car, because in 2009, many car manufacturers were suffering due to the financial crisis. Due to the economic impact of that crisis, potential car buyers were either holding tight to their cash as a hedge against a possible job loss, or they were unable to obtain a car loan from banks that feared a collapse of the entire banking system. As a result, the German government started a scrappage program to revive demand, and the initiative offered buyers of new fuel-efficient cars a $2,500 discount if they scrap a vehicle that was more than 9 years old at that time. And in addition to that, car makers themselves were offering their vehicles at an enormous discount. So George took advantage of this opportunity and bought a VW Touareg. In essence, George received a discount of 25% on the quoted list price, and additionally he enjoyed the premium of $2,500 provided by the German government. Now, based on all these incentives, it's fair to say that George was offered quite a deal here. In total, he paid $30,000 for the Touareg. Let's consider the opportunity cost of that transaction. According to Investopedia, opportunity cost represents the potential benefits an individual, investor, or business misses out on when choosing one alternative over another. Clearly, every choice that you make has consequences, and when we consider the opportunity cost of buying a car, we need to consider or estimate how much George could potentially earn by investing the difference, investing the cost savings between the two options. So we will consider two options for George here. A, not buying a car altogether, and B, buying a cheaper car, maybe a used car instead. For both examples, we will assume that George invested the cost savings in the stock market. So let's start with A. What would have happened if George didn't buy any car at all and invested the money instead? Let's consider two scenarios again. First, let's assume he invested the $30,000 in an S&P 500 ETF. On January 1st, 2009, the S&P 500 was at 865. And now where does the index stand today? Well, let's take a look at January 1st, 2020, to keep it simple here. On January 1st, 2020, the index was at 3,278. And if we use a compound annual growth calculator, we can figure out that this growth represents a compounded annual growth rate of 12.88%. So let's assume that George hadn't bought the vehicle and invested the money in the S&P 500 instead. Then his $30,000 would have become about $122,000 by the beginning of 2020. Okay, on a side note, this channel is relatively new, so if you like my content, you should at least consider hitting the thumbs up button or the subscribe button, of course. And of course, I would also appreciate a comment because it would help me correct the YouTube algorithm, reach more people and grow the channel faster. All right, let's consider a second scenario. If George would have invested his money in the QQQ ETF instead of the S&P, the QQQ is an ETF that tracks the Nasdaq 100 index, which is essentially a large cap growth index. Well, then he even would end up with $246,000 at the start of 2020, because the QQQ delivered a compounded annual growth rate of 19.3% over that 11-year period, which is pretty good, one has to say. Now, clearly, George's car is getting pretty expensive. Before we move on, let me please know in the comments down below whether you have ever considered the opportunity cost of some of your purchase decisions. What do you think are the biggest money traps to avoid, especially at a young age? And have you ever considered the opportunity cost of buying and owning a car? I would love to hear thoughts on this topic. Now, obviously, the period between 2009 and 2020 was a great period for stocks, as the stock market as a whole was pretty cheap right after the financial crisis. And what followed was the longest bull market in history. So, to be fair, one has to say that going forward, based on current valuations, a passive investor investing in the S&P 500 will very likely not achieve similar returns. But nonetheless, the example stresses the importance of considering opportunity cost. Now, of course, this doesn't tell the whole story. George might need his car for his job, and this makes the above example somewhat theoretical. Nevertheless, not everyone really needs a car. Personally, I don't need a car and I don't own a car because I'm very aware of the opportunity cost of owning one. Also, if George needed a car to get to work, for example, he certainly could have bought a cheaper vehicle or a used car. And he could easily have saved 50% or even more, and would be $60,000 richer today if he had invested $15,000 in the S&P 500 in 2009. Moreover, one needs to consider that George might invest for more than 11 years. Let's assume he bought a car for $15,000 instead of the $30,000 VW Touareg and started to invest the remaining $15,000 in 2009. Let's assume a more conservative compounded annual growth rate of 8%. And let's say he plans to invest the money for 30 years. Then he will also be able to cash out $164,000 after 30 years. Obviously, he will have to pay capital gains taxes as well, depending on the type of account he used and also whether he has reached retirement yet. But if we take a look at the graph that shows how the initial investment develops over time, one can very clearly see how an initial investment can grow to enormous sums in the long run. I believe that people following an intelligent investment approach, investors who do their due diligence to find firms with strong moats, an exceptional management team and plenty of reinvestment opportunities and a long runway for growth, investors that are able to patiently wait for 2 to 3 opportunities a year. I believe that these kinds of investors can achieve better returns than 8%, even though 8% is already quite decent. So if we just assume that an intelligent investor can achieve a rate of return of 12% instead of 8%, that would impact the result over 30 years quite significantly. Let's assume George is an intelligent investor and he invests $15,000 when he bought his used car, and then he lets his money compound for 30 years at a compounded annual growth rate of 12%. Well, then he'd end up with $478,000. And to wrap up the numbers part of this video here, let me just point out that so far we have only considered the opportunity cost of the initial purchase price of his car. Besides the purchase price of the car, you will have to pay for maintenance and repair, gas and insurance, and possibly for interest for your car loan. That's why you have to factor these things in as well when you are trying to understand the true cost of owning a car. So obviously you could continually save more money each month if you decide not to drive a car. And here I can only urge you to do your own calculations with a compound interest calculator. If you assume that you can invest an additional $200 or $300 each month if you decide to use the public transportation system instead of operating a car, then this can have quite a major impact on your wealth building journey. As I've said, I'm very aware that some people simply need a car. Nonetheless, these figures should make you aware that whenever you make a purchase decision, you need to consider your opportunity cost. That obviously doesn't mean that you should under no circumstances buy and drive a car, and such a claim would be ridiculous in my opinion. Some people love their cars and some even dream about their car. They enjoy cleaning it every week and simply love driving around with the car. And of course, these folks should go and buy an expensive car if it fulfills them. I love the idea that they have found a passion, but obviously different people will have different priorities. What matters though is that you start spending your money consciously. A great quote from Rami Sethi states, "Spend extravagantly on the things you love and cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't." And I think this is the exact attitude that conscious spenders need to adopt. So if you love cars and want to drive an expensive car, you need to align this purchase with your other priorities. Not every spending area of your life can be a top priority if you want to accumulate wealth. So you should try to cut costs in other areas. Maybe you decide to travel less frequently, or you decide to live in a smaller flat or house. All right, so here are my final thoughts. Realize that every purchase decision you make has an opportunity cost. Every choice that you make has consequences. In the context of purchasing decision, it's easy to focus solely on the upfront and out-of-pocket cost differential between two choices. But you need to consider the opportunity cost of choosing one alternative over another one as well. And one alternative you will always have is to invest your money for the long run and to let compound interest do its magic. So everyone needs to understand how a car can affect his or her wealth building journey. Sure, owning a car can make your life much easier and it can save you a lot of time, energy and stress. But on the flip side, owning a car also means that you will have less money to spend on other things and less money that you can invest and grow over the long run. That's why buying and owning a car can have quite an impact on your finances. I think the question of whether you want to own a car is simply a matter of which sacrifice you're willing to make. A financial sacrifice or a lifestyle sacrifice. Now, of course, if you are already very wealthy and in a strong financial position, you may be able to afford the financial sacrifice of owning a car, and it won't really affect your wealth building or wealth preservation process as much as another individual. I think you don't necessarily have to cut costs in every area of your life, but you have to be aware of the long-term effects of your purchasing decisions. And with that being said, may your finances and investments prosper. Good luck and see you in the next video.